Welcome back to the Reset Strategist. This is the podcast where we pause, reflect, and reset the way we think about care, aging, and what really matters. Today's guest is someone whose story will stay with you. Christian Schoenberger joins us to share the journey of his father's experience in senior living, the challenges, the truths, and the moments that really shaped their journey. Christian's story is not just about one man's life, but about the families caught in the complexities of elder care and the urgent need for change. Christian, thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful for this conversation.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for allowing me to tell my story.
Before we dive into senior living and the experience that you and your father had, we'd like to get to know your dad a bit. Can you tell us who he was, his life story, and the man that you knew?
Yeah, my father was an amazing guy. He was a single father, which was rare
Oh,
because I
yes.
was 5 years old when my mom left. So it was just him and I. And he was a clinical psychologist for a hospital here in Chicago for 25 years. He was a senior tour pro bowler, which is kind
Wow.
of interesting. And then very smart, very kind, loving. And he was my best friend. I talked to him every day. Even in through college, I still called him every day, but just to ask him for money. After that, it was all about advice, you know? He's a great guy.
Oh, well, I know he appreciated the call no matter what the reason. We love it when our kids call us. So, if we'd met your dad on a good day as he was aging, what would we have noticed about him?
He was very small. He's like on his, I think his heaviest, he was like 120 pounds. He's 5'7". He was unique. Like he was a drummer in the Air Force. He actually got to play with 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 Fall Out Boy, who's a Chicago band, at a practice one time. He loved disco music. He was a dancer. Um, he loved airplanes. He loved ducks, probably because they fly too. And he was an avid fisherman. So he retired when he was 54 years old, and then he fished every day. He fished more than he practiced psychology. So yeah, he lived a great life.
Tell me more about when you realized your family was needing more support for your dad.
Well, it's kind of like for him, he was in stages. So he was in New Jersey. He left Chicago when he retired in 1996, and I had just graduated from undergrad. And so he said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to move out." Nobody thinks about retiring to the Jersey Shore, but he did because his brother, who was 18 years younger, lived there, and his mom, my grandma, was there. So, and she needed help. So, he said, "Hey, I'd rather be there. I want to be with the family, and then I start my career here." So, he lived in New Jersey for almost 30 years, and then my uncle was taking care of him and was doing the grocery shopping for him and fixing things around the house if he needed it, and then it got to the point where he needed more care. He needed somebody to live with him, and so that's when we made the decision to bring him to Chicago. So we sold all of his assets and moved him here with a team to live with me, and he lived with me for a year and a half. And it was great. It was like I had my buddy back. We watched basketball. He loved Kentucky basketball
Oh,
because that's where he went for undergrad, and he loves Kentucky. And so we watched basketball games. I got to cook for him, and I really got to, that's when you notice that you know, these these family members that are living on their own, their quality of life is not very good. They don't want any help, but they think that they have it all together. And he had a lot of health problems. So when he came here, it was like, okay, being in Chicago, we have access to some of the best medical care in the world. And so I was able to get him, specialists that he needed, and they really changed his life. I don't think he
wow.
would have lived that long if it wasn't for those doctors. And the quality of life was so good where he can eat anything that he wants. For 15
Yeah.
years, he only ate three things. And then when he moved here, they were able to find out what the problem is. And then, he was like a kid
Wow.
on a first date. Like everything was great. Like, oh my God, she held my hand. This is amazing.
Oh,
That first kiss every
yes.
time, right? That's how he was. He was
Yes.
like, I get turkey and I want meatloaf and I want mashed potatoes and he just loved
Oh,
everything. So
he started
s-
living again and
yeah,
really,
and then
yeah.
it came to the point after a year and a half, you can only assist somebody so much. And then it became 24/7 care. like you notice his memory and his mind is leaving him, and then it starts to become dangerous.
Right.
Like he could walk out of the house, or he could start the house on fire, or and I'm a single dad, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. And so, I need to make sure that like the doors can't be left wide open in the middle of the night. And so at that point, he was in the hospital. He's constantly going back and forth for rehabbing and certain different ailments. And so at that point I said, I think it's time that we move him into a nursing home.
So, did he get a diagnosis of dementia, or you just saw that memory concerns, cognitive decline was more present?
It was dementia, but also the physical part. He broke
Yeah.
his hip, so he couldn't walk, and then he couldn't control his bathroom functioning, and so it was a whole bunch of things that hit at one time where you know
The yeah, and the
yeah.
cognitive.
Hmm.
Bless his heart. Well, a lot of families are in that sandwich generation. We're taking care of our children, we're taking care of ourselves, right? Or we're trying to, and we're taking care of our elderly loved ones. And you can't afford to, like, we're juggling balls and we can't drop one because that's a person.
Well, and the one that you end up dropping is yourself,
Yes.
because you're
Yeah.
not going to drop for your kids, and you're not
No.
going to drop for your parents.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
see on certain people taking care of their loved ones, and they're like, oh, you're such a good son, or you're such a good dad, and it's like, no, I'm his son. Like
Right.
this is what you do.
Right.
You take care of each other. It's not about being good or bad. And once he got moved into to care, I was there every day. I moved him to I moved him to two places, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the last place, he was right by the house, so I was with him every single day, and that makes a big difference.
That does make a difference. Well, a lot of times when folks move into senior living, me being on the other side of the desk as, one of the professionals in the community, our goal is always for families to be able to be family again, and we provide care. Did you experience that where you were able to step away from care, or did you still feel like you needed to partner in care and ensure that your dad was getting the care that he needed? Tell us a little bit about that piece of your journey once he did
Yeah.
move in.
I think, at first you kind of feel guilty because in my dad's situation, he was very confused. He didn't know where he was. He thought he was in an accident. He's like, do you remember what happened to me? Like, can you tell
Oh,
me what happened? Why, how did I get here? And so you kind of go through this ride with, in case with me, with my father, of just telling him, this is where you're at. It's okay. You're right by the house. And so I'm going to be here every day with you. So when they're fearful and they're scared, then it gives them some relief to know that you're there, and I'm
right.
there. He had great care. His caregivers were unbelievable. They were like crying when he passed. And I
Yes.
was there every day. I know, when things were missed, or when things got messed up, when communication was wrong, and they were all great. They were always caring for him in a way that I couldn't. And so I really appreciated that. And he did too.
Yeah.
So
Well, even though we don't cognitively have our memory to maybe if we took a shower, what we had for lunch, we do remember how people made us feel. And your dad, that was one thing that he could feel if he was cared for. He could sit in that emotion, which helps family's journey because there's guilt
yeah.
that you're dealing with that you just cannot be there all the time.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and it was a quite of an experience because I moved him into this one place first. It was a family-owned facility, and the son ran the facility for his stepfather and his mom, who owned the facility.
yeah.
And the first night, my dad had a fall. He had no pendant. He had no way to call for help, and
Oh
so
my,
so that was a problem. And then the next day, he fell, and they got him. He was able to get in the ambulance and go to the hospital, but when he came back, there was no one to let him back in. And so they ended up finally getting a hold of someone after like 8 phone calls, and then someone came to the facility to let him in. And so that's when I realized, like, okay, he needs more care than this. Like,
right.
this is not what they told me when we went in. And then I said, okay, he's only been here a day. It was the second day. I said, I think we need to look to move him because he needs more care. And then I wanted my deposit back.
Right.
And then the kid was like, just come here tomorrow. We'll give you the deposit check back. So then I went there, drove back out there. And then he's like, I changed my mind. You're not getting it. And then I immediately call my attorney. My attorney gets involved. And then 3 weeks later, I got the check in the mail. But I had to move my dad again, right?
Oh,
So, you want to make sure that the care is right. And it's not, they all tell you that they can take care of them, but then, sometimes they can't. So the second place that I moved him, that's where he finished his days. And it was definitely a lot better than the first place. So that's important. The type of care is very
that
important.
is important. So, to help the listener through this process, when you went to the first community, it was assisted living. Okay. So, it being assisted living, it's standardized. The care is standardized. So, the regulations tell us for assisted living in your state what we can and can't do. So, all communities should have that umbrella of care. Then, on top of that, there are policies and procedures of each company that may have further restrictions, right? So, care may
Mhm.
be here for the state, and then policies say, well, we're going to do this because it's a risk management for liability, the staffing model that we have. And so, those conversations is what the marketing and sales director should be communicating with families and that clinical leader that does the assessment with your dad before he
Yeah.
moves in. Did you have that experience or what did that look like?
Yeah, we had that experience and we said he's a fall risk. He just broke his hip. So, he's obviously falling and
Right.
they felt like, hey, we can take care of it. And it was I mean, it was pretty inexpensive for Chicago. It was started out at like $5,400 a month, which for assisted living is very economical. Then it was like, this isn't right,
Yeah.
and so we had to move them. And then, it's the same thing, the same type of assessment,
Okay.
except this is I guess a commercialized uh,
Corporation.
corporation. Yeah, so
Right, right,
so it's much different here, and people are supposedly held accountable, and it's not son talking to mom and dad.
right.
So I needed that kind of care for him, and it was a lot better, but there was mistakes, like big mistakes, not from the care, but you have to worry about the leadership team. Four different executive directors in 4 months. My dad finished out his life there. He was only there for 4 months, but it was a nightmare from a leadership standpoint.
So let's kind of unpack that so that it can be a learning opportunity because I know that's what our conversation is today. The industry needs more accountability, and that's why we're having this conversation today. So, what would you say to the listener that is looking for a place for their loved one, or to the professional in the industry as somebody that wants to say, for your dad's experience, I want to speak on his behalf? What would that be?
I think there's two. It's pretty simple. There's two things you need to look out for. One is the type of care, and can they provide that care? And if they
Okay.
say they're providing the care, then you need to make sure that that's the care that's given. And the
Okay.
second part is the financial aspect of it. She wanted to be in Florida, so I moved her to a place in Florida. I moved her into a facility down there, and it was $1,500 a month with meals and everything included on the
Wow.
beach in St. Petersburg. My dad at the end, they were trying to charge me $14,000 a month, and he wasn't getting better care than my mom was in
Wow.
Florida. So just try to figure that out. Like, hey, if you tell me it's $5,800, and then the next month and all of a sudden it jumps up to 12,000, and the next month it's 14,000. It's like, wait, he needs two people to lift him. Well, my dad was 80 pounds. It's like, does he really need two people to lift him? And then since they said, no, we have to have two people lift him. So then when I'm there, there's only one person lifting him. So it's like, okay, that's $160 a day, right? So
Wow.
you have to be there to watch to see what's going on. And I think the other part too is this is where the community is important because my dad sat with these three other fellas at lunch and dinner and breakfast. And they didn't really speak much. And so when I would go there during mealtime, I would usually bring the guys something because they don't get out and nobody visited them. And so there was an Oberweis next door. So every once in a while, I'd bring them a chocolate shake. And then they would watch my dad like a hawk. Like, your dad was about to eat the sugar packets and I stopped him. And I'm like, oh, thanks. Or there's supposed to be somebody feeding him. Just letting you know, there wasn't somebody feeding him, and so they really look
They
out for him.
communicate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's not just, your loved one that's there, but you need to make sure you have eyes, when you're not there. So it's very important.
Build community inside the community.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I think I saw so many people there that were just alone
That's sad.
and they'll die alone. And you got to go visit them, even if it's not your family member, even if it's a friend or your friend's parents who are in a nursing home. Go visit them. It's amazing,
Yeah.
and whether it's 10 minutes or 2 hours, it's all appreciative, and you can take that time out of your day to do that for them, just like they did. Well, they made you peanut butter and jelly when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Like, it's time to give back to them. They need us.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
A lot of communities, if not just a majority, have volunteers that come in for activities and, church groups and children's groups and choirs and things like that. And it really does lift their spirits because just because we are now living inside a community doesn't mean we are not part of the greater community. We're still living. We
Oh
just
yeah.
have a different environment that needs different supports, but we
Mhm.
still want community.
I think another big part is the billing. If these organizations realized how much pressure and stress is already on the caregivers and the families that are taking care of them, that the billing has to be right. And
Yes.
they overcharge $4,000, and they're like, "Oops," like, "Oh, we're sorry, we'll fix it." But if he had like auto debit out of his account, like most of them do, that money would have been gone. you
Yeah.
know? And then the next month they tried to fix it, but they were still $400 off. And then the next month they still owed $700 back to me. And then the last month after he passed away, they tried to bill me for $28,000. And
Wow.
he had already passed away the month before. And it's like, what are you doing? And so that's when, I was so furious that I took to social media, and I was posting that $28,000 bill on their LinkedIn sites and their comments. And I have a very big LinkedIn presence. So, I got like 18,000 views, and they reached out to me and they fixed it. They reversed it all. But it's like nobody's watching them.
But it didn't take away the emotional stress of you just lost your father and you're
Right.
grieving. And now you have this unpleasant business end to his last home. And it's not the emotion that you wanted to experience of gratitude for care, which you've already expressed. The caregivers were great with your father and
Hmm.
showed him love and care. And that wanted to be your lasting memory.
Yeah.
Right. And instead, you're fighting that is taking away from your grief process.
And it's taken away from all of our quality of life, his
Yeah.
and mine. And I sat in there with this whole care team, and there's like 10 of us in there, included the last executive director. And I told them, I said, you're taking his candy. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, in middle school, we would go out right after school with our pillowcases and we would go trick or treating until about 8:30 at night because we knew at 8:30 at night we had full pillowcases. But then like the teenagers would be coming out and they would take your pillowcase, right? And so we're like, we got to get home, right? And that's what I feel like. That's what these places were doing. My dad worked his whole life, and then they just come in and they just try to
Swipe it
snatch
off.
it, from
Yeah.
him. So, you have to protect yourself, and you're dealing with family issues, if you have siblings and all these things that you have to try to navigate through, while you're still caring for your loved one. So it's a stressful time.
Well, in reflection, how do you think this experience shaped your view on aging and care?
I think that you have to realize that when you move somebody into a nursing home, it's a means to the end. I think the other part of it is, for me, is, I have a trust. I'm a single dad. I have my daughter, and I don't want a nursing home to take my daughter's inheritance, right? So,
Right.
So I have it all set up and I don't have to worry about that. And it really does simplify your life. But just know that like what your mindset is today is not necessarily what it's going to be at the end if you're fortunate to live that long. I want to live the best part of my life until the last day of my life, you know. There were these bacon farm and they said, you know, and they had these pigs and they said, you know, these pigs have everything they could ever want. They have, you know, all the other pigs to play with. They have an open range. They have all the food they can eat. You know, they have an amazing life, and then they just have one bad day, you know. And so that's how I feel. You know, I just want to be that pig. I want to have everything that I could ever want, and then, you
That
know,
one bad day.
one bad day, right? So when it's time to go, it's time to go.
Yeah.
So
Do you think that it's Monday, what do they call it? The Monday quarterback, right? And
mhm.
looking back, your dad was only in senior living for about 4 months, 3 or 4 months. If you had to do it all over again, would you do anything differently?
I want to take him to that first place, but other than that, you know, his care never changed. He didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. He got great care,
That's
and
good.
I was there with him every day. And I feel like that was the most important part. You know, I would be
That's good.
FaceTiming my sister who wasn't able to be there with us, and then I brought friends. Like my friends, my friends loved him. For him to be back at 30 years from being away, you know, and his friends. My dad knew everyone in the town that we grew up in, you know, and
Oh,
so some of his friends got to come, and people made trips just to see him before the end. So,
mm,
you know, that meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to him. And so, you know, I feel like, you know, I wish I had more people, more, you know, that would come and visit him because
yeah.
it does make a difference in their life.
That's beautiful. Well, I think it was your dad was a gift to everyone through his life, and they were now paying those respects of coming to visit him when he needed them, you know,
Yeah.
for sure. That's that's a sweet story. I'm glad that his care wasn't compromised and it was behind the scenes that you did some battles to make sure as his son, as his advocate, that the right thing was done for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all need to have someone like that. You know, there's so many people that say, hey, whatever you need, whatever you need. And I remember I called those people like, hey, my dad has two recliners. They're brand new, not even sat in. Do you need them or your kids need them or someone needs them? Would you be able to take them? And they're like, let me check. And they call back 5 minutes later and they're like, ah, we can't find somebody that needs them. But if you need anything else, let me know. And it's like, that's what I needed. That's all I needed. It's like, thanks.
You can't pick the need. This is the
Right.
need.
Right. No,
There's no other needs to need.
like, no, you know, I need someone to talk to for 3 minutes. Do you got that? Oh, yeah, I'll do that, you know,
I
but
got that.
right. I can do that. But yeah, so just know you need to have that structure supporting you when you're supporting your loved ones, you know.
That's that is so true. That is so
So
true. Well, Christian, thank you so much for sharing your dad's story, the story of your family, and for really putting a human face on what senior living really means. And to our listeners, this conversation reminds us that behind every resident is a life, a family, and a legacy deserving of respect and care. And so until next time, I'm Donna Stevens, and this is the Reset Strategist to keep resetting what's possible.
thanks, Donna.